So where can you get lots of Florida gardening tips? Welcome everybody to Vlogmas. This is my gift from me to you between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We are doing lots and lots of bonus videos Monday through Friday between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Did I already say that? And today we're going to be answering a question from Yahindi. Hi from South Florida. Hi South Florida. Besides YouTube, what other resources helped you build your garden? And this is a great question. And even though Yahindi said not just YouTube, I'm going to bring up some other YouTubers for those who would like, but I'm going to hit a bunch of other resources too. So let's discuss places that have helped me. So I think I talked a little bit about this on the other channel. Some of the bigger YouTubers who have helped me as a Florida gardener have been David the Good. His discussions about food forest, showing how you can kind of have an atypical lawn in his parents' yard. Plus, he does lots of really great stuff. I really think David does an excellent job of kind of using the scientific method. I loved what he did. I think it was a year ago, 2 years ago. He took like 12 beds, did different fertilizers and different like methods, and did a comparison, and he planted the same crop, and then he did a taste test to see which ones tasted better. Not only what produced better, but what tasted the best. I really like that. He's very goofy. He is very, let me put it this way. He's very South Florida. And so if you are South Florida and you're into that kind of kooky Key West vibe, I think you'll enjoy David. And he has a really interesting thought process. So I recommend David the Good. Pete Canaris of Green Dreams, because I know I mentioned Pete and people were like, who? I was like, Pete Canaris. Him and his work with Jim Kovaleski. Jim Kovaleski, he shows a lot on his channel, shows a lot of like how you could do your front yard different with vegetables, which I think is really, really inspiring. And Jim Kovaleski goes through a lot of like how to like mix your soil using mulch a lot. And I've learned a lot from him. Also, Pete, just like for lots of tropical fruit ideas, if you're looking for tropical fruit ideas and what they look like, and maybe a discussion of how they taste. And then because he's a landscaper, he does show projects where he puts them in. I think he's a really good resource. Plus, he does show some amount of native plants. He usually doesn't focus on them too much these days. He kind of just like breezes past them, but he does talk a little bit about them. For vegetable gardening tips, from a YouTube channel that I think is really good is Urban Harvest, Elise Pickett. She's actually in St. Pete where I live. She does a really good job of breaking down some of the like fundamental things from troubleshooting. So I think she does a really, really good job of that. So Urban Harvest. Some other ones that I think are up and coming channels that you guys should check out. If you're into mango, Sulcata Grove, they were giving me some mango tips. So I really appreciate them. Another one who, if you want to kind of see a homesteady type family, but a little bit more out in the homestead, a Summer with Southern Dirt Gardener. She's over in Sebring. So she puts out videos. I think she does a really good job showing some of the like homesteading life and what to grow, and she can give you some other additional ideas. Someone who just gave me a really good idea the other day. I didn't know you could grow rice here, but Homegrown Florida was showing how. Patrina, she did a really good job. She's a smaller channel, but I think, you know, she's gonna stick with it. She's gonna get bigger over time. So I would check out her. She does a combination of both the growing and like how to use some of it. So check out Patrina on Homegrown Florida. And I'll link a lot of this stuff down below in the description. Another one who actually does vegetable tropicals recipes, but also does natives, and actually, like, I was watching her video for scarlet hibiscus the other day, is Spring Meadow Garden and Farm. She actually sent me some seeds, which was really nice for our native scarlet hibiscus. So she's also one of those smaller channels that's really starting to figure out, like, do her thing. Southern Latitudes is another one if you want to see some recipe stuff and vegetables and a little bit of butterfly gardening. So those are some of the smaller channels. I'm probably missing some others, but those are ones that I have seen more regularly and I think have some good resources. So check those out from a YouTube perspective. And if you know of other YouTube channels, you know, comment them down below. But because you asked me to kind of not focus on YouTube, let me switch over to some of the other resources that are out there for learning gardening tips, getting ideas from, and learning information. So number one, when it comes to vegetables and not necessarily tips, but when you want to look at the varieties and timing, the University of Florida's IFAS Exchange is a really, really important resource. What probably a lot of people don't realize, it's not just because I'm a Gator is why I recommend it, but University of Florida has a massive agricultural department, and they work a lot with like the USDA. They do a lot of testing for agricultural institutions. So they have, like, if you're ever on UF, if you go kind of to the southern end, not of the main campus, but there's like places where they're raising cattle, they're testing different crops. They do a lot of work. If you kind of head out on the southern end of Gainesville, they do a lot of testing, and they do a lot of research for things like looking into citrus greening. So they're the ones doing that kind of research. So they put out articles regularly, and then plus they have a lot of resources, especially on the agricultural front. I would say when it comes to native plants, they're all right. They're not great. They're just okay. Really, if you want to know about native plants and things that are going to work really, really well, is hands down Florida Native Plant Society. Florida Native Plant Society. They have tons of resources, things that break down each type of plant. They have a lookup tool so you can figure out if you're looking, like, depending on what zip code you live in, you need sunny, you need shade, you need wet, you need dry areas, whatever, beach. No matter what kind of property you have, that tool can help you figure out things that you can grow. It can be a little overwhelming because it's just like a list. So that's a little challenging. But if you just need to look up, like if you hear me talk about a plant, like I probably got the information from Florida Native Plant Society if it's not my own personal observations. And also you can join Florida Native Plant Society, and WILDFLORIDIan LLC is a proud sponsor of Florida Native Plant Society. So I'm a big fan of what they do. I actually told Val, the communications director, I was like, you guys don't charge enough to be part of this society. I think it's like $35 a year, and they send you like a magazine and stuff like that with new information about research or information about plants. They have every Friday, a lunch and learn where they have researchers and people who go out into the field, and they have landscapers. They do great talks. So for $35 a year, I mean, they should charge more, honestly. They do a lot of excellent work. They do restorations of areas. And then the other thing with Florida Native Plant Society is if you join, you can join your county group, and your county one. So like I have the Pinellas Florida Native Plant Society. There's things that group is doing in your area. So like they may be putting together a butterfly garden at a local park, and you can go and then actually see stuff that works like where you live. Not where I live, where you live. And so even in my Pinellas County one, like there's subcommittees like the Urban Wildlife Corridor. So I'm actually on that committee. And if you don't know about the Wildlife Corridor of Florida, you should look into that. It's a really interesting thing that we as Floridians voted for, that goes from, it's about securing lands for our wildlife, our keystone species, from our northern border with Alabama and Georgia and all the way down to the Keys to connect those lands. And so we're looking at how we can create our piece of that in Pinellas County, because we're technically not on that. And while we won't be able to help keystone species, we're looking at how we can help pollinators and butterflies and birds and stuff like that. So Florida Native Plant Society. Another one that's really good and does a lot of really good work too is the Florida Wildlife Foundation. They have a lot of additional detail on native plants that are wildflowers, and they work with the Florida Department of Transportation. So when you see wildflowers as you're driving on the highway, especially central North Florida, that's the work that they've done with the Department of Transportation. They're a big piece of that. And they also have the Florida Wildflower Cooperation, which is an easy source for getting a lot of seeds for native wildflowers. So, but they have additional information. They also send out articles. We are also a proud sponsor of the Florida Wildflower Foundation. And so they send out lots of information. And it's a great way for you to learn about what's going on, but also learn about specific plants. There's a couple other resources. UCF has the plant atlas for Florida, and this is a huge, so when someone tells you about a plant or you buy a plant and you want to know some very basic information, if you look up the UCF plant atlas, it is a huge database that can tell you things about whether it's native, where it's native to, and that's not as useful for like the native plants. It's more useful for exotic plants, because if you're especially trying to figure out if it's invasive, it's a quick way for you to figure out if it's an invasive species or not. So, which is problematic, which is another resource I use, which is the FLPECC, Florida Pest and Exotic Plant Council. I might not have the letters right. I'll put the right way you say it here. I use them a lot for looking up information about invasive species. Fun fact, because I know a few people out there, plants being considered invasive has zero to do with my opinion and 100% to do with the work that University of Florida, the people who work on the Plant Atlas, the native plant societies, a lot of these researchers, it's based on their work, and they don't put plants on those lists very lightly. They actually, some of them, they look at them for 10 years before they actually even put it on them. So you can go out there and you can find information where they'll be saying like this plant is likely to be considered invasive, but not. And there'll be a review on blah, blah, blah year. A great section of resources that I have used is Facebook. Facebook groups. I know sometimes Facebook can be like, but there are some really, really, really good Facebook groups that have some really good communities that I would highly recommend. There are a bunch on the vegetable tropical side, from Central Florida Vegetable Gardening to Friends of Florida. Is that what that one group's called? A lot of those ones. So if you're into vegetable gardening, there's also the permaculture, so it's permaculture groups, Florida food forest groups. And while I've spent time on those, the ones I spent way more time on, I mean, you all know I'm passionate about native plants, so I spend way more time. And also because I think when groups are smaller, I think once they hit like 100,000 people on it, it's hard to get to know anyone or really get good advice. But on the native side, I think there's some really good groups, and I think they do really good work. Joseph Lawrence's group, Joseph Lawrence Jr.'s group, which is Native Florida Plants. He posts articles and he posts like kind of like plants of the day. So instead of being like, I don't know what to grow, like he's posting stuff. And so you can get kind of inspired and learn about a plant that you wouldn't even know to look for. And I think that's really important when you're dealing with stuff that you wouldn't even know. Like you don't even know what to look for. So you're not going to go to UF or Florida Native Plant Society looking for it because you don't even know about it. And I think that group's really good for just kind of being randomly exposed to plants. And then another group that I think is really, really good is Florida Native Gardening. Gia and Jan, they run that group. Both those groups try to keep it really positive. They try to keep it very nice to be part of those groups. I think they do a very good job of that. And Florida Native Gardening, I think, is really good. If you are doing native gardening and you're just looking for like, how could this look in my yard? That's a great group to be part of because people are posting their yards, they're asking questions. And as I get to this next section, there's some additional resources in those groups, which I'll talk about in a second. Looking for ideas, Facebook groups, there's a bunch in there. And it can, I mean, it goes all different directions. There's also even a Florida native plant identification. So like when you're walking around your yard and you're like, what is that? You can take a picture of it and post it to that group. And there's people who know native plants who they'll identify it for you, or they'll let you know it's an exotic or an invasive. But why that's also even beneficial is if you got something that you're like, I don't know what this is, and they identify it, because some of the researchers of native plants are in those groups. They may contact you and be like, hey, can I come get a sample? Can I come get seeds and stuff like that? So it's really good for the whole where we're trying to go in Florida with like our ecosystem. And then let's get into this next section, which is books, because some of us learn by books. And there's some authors I'm going to kind of point you to. One, David the Good. His Food Forest book, the old one, was one of the first books I got that was specific to Florida gardening that I really liked. I haven't read his new books, mostly because I'm writing my own book and I didn't want to be up in my head about what he wrote versus what I'm going to write. So I just wrote my thing and then I'll read his stuff later when I'm done. But David the Good, especially if you're into like food forests, prepping, homesteading. I know he just put out the grocery row. So if you're kind of one of those people, especially if you aren't into having very manicured spaces, like if you're just kind of like, go with the flow, see what works. I feel like his style of gardening is really good for that personality type. If you don't worry about that kind of stuff. And it's okay if you don't worry about that stuff. Some people like that. They want everything to be very neat and tidy. And some people like that stresses them out. So if you're kind of like, I want to have more of a, I feel like if you're very artistic and you just kind of like want to see what happens and be most efficient and not waste a bunch of time and be very cost effective, David's really good for that stuff. I like a lot of the way he thinks about things. But if you want to think of, and if you are wanting to do a mix of like vegetables, tropicals, and native plants, a person who put out a book recently, Jenny Stimbolt, she just did like, I think it's called Beginner Adventures in Florida Gardening. I might not be naming that correctly. So it's kind of like, how do you bring some of this stuff together, similar to what I do? And she just, I think her book came out this year. So it was pretty recent. And then if you're looking for like, I don't know what I want to grow, but I want to learn about just a bunch of random flowers. Roger Hammer has a bunch of different kind of like these guidebooks. So whether it's Florida Wildflowers or plants that attract hummingbirds and butterflies. Like you can just flip through and be like, I want pink things. What? Tell me about pink things. So I think that's really helpful, especially in the beginning when you're like, I don't even know what I don't even know. So Roger Hammer is a good resource. He's one of the ones who goes out in the field and actually does research. So more list type. If you want to think about how it kind of comes together and you want to get more wildlife, Craig Hugel's a really good author for that. So this is Native Plant Landscaping for Florida Wildlife. He's done other books that are like wildlife, native plant stuff. So he's in that space. And then another one is Stacy Matrazzo. She did like how to landscape with native plants. And here's the cool thing. This is why I mentioned the Facebook groups, and I said like there's other resources there. These people are in those Facebook groups. They are posting in those Facebook groups, and they are answering people's questions in those Facebook groups. Craig Hugel is pretty active. Roger Hammer sometimes. Ginny Stimbolt's pretty active. Stacy Matrazzo is pretty active in those groups. So you can talk to the authors of these books in those groups. So if you're looking for some of those things. So that's a bunch of the resources that I have used and I have found very helpful for specific to Florida gardening, not just like general kind of gardening. And I think the other one was like, oh, what's the name of it? I will definitely link it down below. The Suburban Microfarm. It was written by 10th Acre Homestead, and they were ones that David the Good was the one who recommended the book years ago, and I picked it up. And it was about like 10th Acre Farming is the name of the YouTube channel, and she wrote a book called The Micro Farm. And I thought that was really cool because it was kind of talking about how you could put edibles in your landscape. And I thought that was pretty big influence on me in the beginning, though it's not for Florida, but it kind of helped me with the concepts. So that's a bunch of resources that I found very helpful, from YouTube to Facebook to websites to books, and I hope those help you. I will put a bunch of links in the description below so that you can find these things and have them help you too. Okay, remember, if you would like a question answered, go ahead and put it down in the comments below. We'll be answering lots of these between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye.